hear me all right? Okay. So we're going to start out with Joe Conzo. And if you all will just raise your hands as you know, I introduced you. Probably most everyone here knows who you are, but there might be a few who don't. So Joe Conzo Jr. is one of the pioneers of hip-hop photography. Starting out as a yearbook staff member at South Bronx High School, Conzo became the official photographer of the legendary Cold Crush Brothers, a trailblazing group whose musical influence is still felt today. True to his family roots, he also devoted his considerable talents to documenting both the giants of Latin music and the activists who fought to defend the rights of Puerto Ricans in New York City. His grandmother, as I mentioned, was Dr. Evelina Antonetti, the founder of United Bronx Parents, and his father, Joe Sr., was Tito Puente's confidant and archivist. Ricky Flores, right there. Ricky was born in New York to Puerto Rican parents in 1961. His father, a merchant seaman, and his mother, a garment worker, lived in the Tremont section of the Bronx during the early 1960s. Flores' father died in 1965 from bronchial asthma, and his mother moved the family to the Longwood section of the Bronx where he was raised. Flores started documenting life in the South Bronx after he purchased a camera with a small inheritance he received from his father in 1980. He embarked on a journey of self-discovery born out of photographing his friends and family during one of the most turbulent times in the history of the Bronx in New York City. And I'll just mention both Joe and Ricky have really beautiful books of their photography that have been published outside that you can purchase if you would like to. They're really great books. Thanks for the plug, Steve. Yay, my pleasure. Angel Franco. All right, was born in 1951 in the South Bronx and is the youngest of the Seis del Sur. He began his career as a professional photographer at the age of 18. After winning a full scholarship and obtaining a BFA in photography from the renowned School of Visual Arts in New York City, he firmly established himself in the photographic community and as a result was hired as a staff photographer by the New York Times. While bringing his unique vision to documentary photography to the Times, Mr. Franco continued to pursue his own personal projects, which have taken him around the world. Mr. Franco's work is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art and the George Eastman House, as well as private collections. He was an adjunct professor at New York University, an instructor at the International Center of Photography and the New School for Social Research, and has many other interests in the photographic medium that are really cool but you know, he can talk about that if he wants to. David González. David is a journalist and photographer whose career spans 4 decades as a journalist, columnist, and editor at the New York Times and Newsweek magazine, covering local, national, and international news. Mr. González was born and raised in the Bronx, where he attended Cardinal Hayes High School. He earned a BA from Yale in 1979 and a master's in journalism from Columbia University in 1983. Before entering journalism in 1983, he worked for several nonprofit agencies active in New York City's Latino and African American communities, starting as project coordinator at Enfoco, a Bronx-based arts group which supported emerging Latino photographers. And there's also, I believe, an Enfoco exhibit that's out in the gallery. Okay, let's see. Carmen Mojica. Carmen Mojica Martinez was born in 1956 in Vega Alta and resides in San Lorenzo, Puerto Rico, with over 40 years dedicated to photography. She has also been an active promoter of the arts, working as a curator and organizer of visual and social arts projects. Carmen began her photography studies in New York City under the guidance of Frank Gimpaya at Bronx Community College, where she was initially studying to become a legal secretary. She continued her education through workshops at the Bronx Photography Project Seminar, learning from renowned photographers like Ruth Orkin, Gordon Parks, and others. Her interest in photojournalism led her to further studies with photographers such as Mel Rosenthal and Ricky Flores at Empire State College. All right, Abigail Montes. Abigail is a documentary photographer, educator, and youth arts coordinator from the South Bronx. She graduated from LaGuardia Community College in 2002 with an AS in commercial photography. Since 2013, she has worked with various initiatives amplifying youth voices through photography. In 2018, she completed the Documentary Practice and Visual Journalism 1-year certificate program at the International Center of Photography and was awarded the Documentary Arts Fellowship. In 2019, Montes became the co-coordinator and lab manager of ICP at The Point, a youth photo program based in the neighborhood where she grew up and centers her documentary practice. In 2021, she earned a BFA in photography from St. John's University. Okay, now, Edwin Pagán. Edwin Pagán is a first-generation Nuyorican who was born in New York City's Lower East Side, Loisaida, to Puerto Rican parents. Pagán was exposed to photography at the age of 10 while a member of the Madison Square Boys and Girls Club, the Hoe Avenue division in the South Bronx. During those early formative years, he was mentored by the club's art director, Ernesto Lozano, who instilled a strong sense of documenting everyday events in the local community as a means of preserving its history. Over the next 4 decades, Pagán has chronicled life in the area with an insider's point of view and created a body of work that reflects the tenacity and dignity of the people who lived through tumultuous times when the South Bronx was vilified and written off. The lessons learned during that time proved valuable in transforming him into an artist with the ability to see rather than just look. So those are our panelists. So let's give it up for them first. Really an incredible group of panelists to assemble. It's like assembling the Avengers, but better because they're from the Bronx. And now to introduce our moderator, Michael Max Knobbe of BronxNet. Let's give it up for Michael. Born and raised in the Kingsbridge section of the Bronx, Michael Max Knobbe has a background in the arts and production and is an advocate for health and fitness, community awareness, and media integrity. He is a graduate of the Bronx High School of Science, holds a BA in Studio Art and World History from Drew University, and an MFA from Lehman College. Serving as executive director of BronxNet Television since 2002, Michael Max Knobbe has pioneered and guided many initiatives at the network, including the production of award-winning content that builds community, connects the Bronx to the world, and provides young people with professional skills to take on the challenges of an ever-changing digital landscape. Let's give it up for Michael and all the panelists, and we'll start our discussion.
Gracias. Gracias. A round of applause for Dr. Stephen Payne. Really great to be here with you also in Teatro Pregones. A round of applause for Rosalba and the Teatro Pregones team. You know, we at BronxNet have documented, and many of the lenses in this room have documented the transformation here in the South Bronx with this cultural corridor and Pregones going from St. Anne's Church to the Vivero to Ostos Community College to this beautiful space that is a really haven for the arts and culture. So we are so proud to be here with you today at this, we have the receipts, Artist Talk Back. And this Artist Talk is connected also to the exhibition, the interactive multimedia arts exhibition that Dr. Payne mentioned. It is now at the Museum of Bronx History on Bainbridge Avenue, HISTORIAS. It's the stories behind the image. And I am the executive director of your public service participatory media network, BronxNet, su voz, su opinión, su visión. And the people of the Bronx are particularly strong for multitudes of reasons. And this is truly manifest in the expansive work of Seis del Sur. And we can see this in this exhibition and across the 4 exhibitions that Seis del Sur have done to this date. And over decades, we are going to see the intangible history and heritage of a people that have been carefully documented in so many ways with a level of care and conscientiousness that I think we can discuss. Why is it important to tell these stories and preserve these stories and document and disseminate in ages, in times of misinformation, disinformation, and misrepresentation? And I think we can start this conversation by asking you, Joe, Ricky, Edwin, and Angel, and David, with Francesco, how Seis del Sur came together. What is the origins? And then how you expanded to include Abigail and Carmen in the collective. And any order, and feel free to pick up a mic. Where did it happen? How did you guys come together? Did you know of each other?
David, I think you tell the story. He tells the story really well. Yeah.
I guess so. Expectations are up. What happened was, in 2009 or so, I think, Joe had an exhibit at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies library named after his grandmother. And the six of us were there. And we didn't all know each other. But, you know, I knew Joe because I'd written about Joe about 2 years before that, or a year before that. Franco I knew. Ricky I knew about. Edwin I knew about, but I never met them. And what happened was at this exhibit, we were looking at Joe's pictures, but we were also realizing that a lot of us had photographed some of those same events, in some cases on the same freaking block, in some cases on the same day. But we didn't know each other. We didn't know all six. And so we just got the idea to, very impulsively, it just came out, it just grew out of that moment of realization and our friendship. It's that simple. And in the early days, originally, we wanted, you know, we were trying to find Carmen and we couldn't find her. We knew Carmen was an OG, but we didn't know where she was. At least I didn't. And so, you know, eventually as time wore on, you know, a couple of things happened. Yo, we're getting older, okay? So, you know, you got to think of like those who come after you. Yeah, we are, bro. Hate to break the news. Well, you're older. But also, you know, it's always, you know, we always saw Seis as not, you know, a number that defines how many people are in this thing, but just, you know, it's time to bring in some new people. In some cases who were alongside us, like with Carmen, or with Abigail, someone who's following in our tradition. I mean, she's doing, you know, what we were doing. And so it's good to, you know, bring in newer people, get more perspectives. And, you know, the goal is to basically, you know, tell the story of the Bronx as we saw it, not as somebody who parachuted in and, you know, did photographs of how we looked. Pardon my French.
And we're going to build a cipher here together as part of this discussion today, this artist talk. We're also going to have a Q&A at the end of this initial discussion. But, you know, as we build a cipher, you guys built a cipher. You had an open work. You had these photo battles. You had, you know, call and response. Can you share something about that? Like, this is how people come together. You had maybe heard of each other. You had impressions about each other.
We met each other that one night, and then after that, we started just putting up pictures on social, and it got interesting.
Yeah, this guy is obnoxious. He started and stuff like that. You know, he started posting all these photographs on Facebook, and the next thing you know, we're just throwing one photograph after another. And we began to see that there were connections between not only what we were doing in our own respective works, but what we were doing as a group and what we were seeing growing up and during that period of time. But you could talk about a little bit what that looked like.
So, I mean, listen, you know, I'm grateful for everybody that's sitting up here, everybody. This is, you know, just a chance thing that happened at one of my exhibitions at Hunter College where, you know, I got to meet people that I've heard of and never met before and build a bond that's been going on now for over a decade.
Most of us knew your aunt or your grandmother before we knew you.
Directly. Yeah.
True. So, yeah. But, you know, it just snowballed into something, you know, that we just got together and we've been blessed to have done several exhibitions as a group and individual. But getting back to Ricky, so Ricky to this day is still looking for a photograph of me because I posted a photograph of him during the Puerto Rican Day Parade in 1984, 85. And Ricky's wearing a pair of Webo pants and a jersey, and he's taking pictures of Spider-Man.
You see why he's a troublemaker, right?
So, to this day, Ricky's still combing through, what, 20, 30,000 images looking for a picture of me.
He's in there somewhere.
And Edwin, do you want to talk a little bit about what you were seeing? Like, what were you seeing in the Bronx? When did you decide to pick up this camera? When did you have like this realization that there's something
Sure.
here?
I mean, for me, it started when I was 10. We had just moved into a new neighborhood, only a few blocks over, to 174th and Southern Boulevard. sort of across from the Dover Theater that was there. It's not there anymore. And it's just where the 2 and 5 turn headed to Tremont. And so my mother enrolled me in the Hoe Avenue Boys and Girls Club. One, because she was a single mother, and two, because I was at home. I was messing up everything. And she knew I needed some sort of guidance, you know, just maybe some male oversight or just recreational activities. And I think I was at the Boys Club probably no more than a month before I went down to the lower level of the Boys Club, because it has 3 floors. Upstairs is gym and a basketball court. The main floor has pool tables, ping pong. It's also the office area. But in the lower level, you had the art department. So they had a kiln that you could do pottery and they could fire it up. They had a fully stocked wood shop with all the carving tools and everything else. And then outside of that, there was this magical room, which was painted black, which was a dark room. And I remember one time I popped in with some friends, and we only had gone into the ceramic room to steal the clay so that we can go outside in the summer and pelt each other with clay. But on the way up the steps, I hung out a second too long at the door jamb looking into this dark room, and Ernesto Lozano, who was my mentor after that for 8 years, he said, "You're basically in or out because you're disturbing the class that was in progress." So I left because I wanted to go play with my friends, but I came back the next day. And he explained what they were doing there. And, you know, I started coming on the days that he told me, and for about 7 or 8 years, he was my mentor. So he told me how to develop film, how to shoot, how to print. And the Boys Club would send me out to photograph other events in the community. And I didn't understand that at first. It was like, why am I taking pictures of other organizations and block parties? And Ralph Porter, who was the director at that time, told me, well, you're getting all these services for free. You're not paying for film. You're not paying for any of the chemicals and paper. This is how you give back, because those organizations don't have a staff photographer. And so I would print 8x10s and take them to, you know, MBD, Mid-Bronx Desperado, when Genevieve Brooks was there, and other organizations. And that was their way of also teaching me that if you get something, you should give something back. But that also helped me to focus on my community, because then it became very clear in my mind that this was needed there. And not only that, but I photographed, if you see my photos in the back when they come up, my interest was more in people my age, photographing young people, right? It was easy, but it was also accessible to me. And interesting, just because of the various things that kids do that most people think is bonkers, but it was interesting to me. So that was my intro into it. And what I saw at the time was a lot of destruction, but when you were in the middle of it, you didn't see it that way. When I went to School of Visual Arts also through the Boys Club for a semester. They sent me to a cinematography class and a film production class. And one of the students one time asked me very outright, how was it to be poor in the South Bronx? And I didn't know how to answer that, because truth be told, to me, everything was fine, right? You get used to your surroundings, and there was food in the table, and as Joe often says, you know, Doña Carmen upstairs, if there wasn't, Doña Carmen upstairs would hook you up, right? Because the community knit was really tight. And so I didn't know what he wanted me to say, but I obviously didn't have anything to say that would have encouraged that question any further. So I think we had the best of both worlds. We were living in a time of tumultuous and sort of chaos, but for us, we integrated ourselves into what we were doing as any other kids would do in any environment.
And on how you know, 6 Puerto Rican artists, right? And you're forming these interests and this experience, you know, your road, a little bit of your early life in the Bronx, you know, that kind of led you to meet the Seis del Sur, to form the Seis del Sur, be a part of this collective. And then, I'd love to hear Carmen and Abigail, what you had heard of Seis del Sur before you joined and become a part of the collective.
Well, Ricky Flores is responsible. With me, the Seis del Sur, like myself, documented the South Bronx in the 80s, maybe even the 70s. Like 76, I entered Bronx Community College. And then 78, 79, I become the photo editor to Bronx Community College. And I worked with Art DiMatteo. So he's a figure that I have not met mentioned in my timeline. And that's what I mentioned before to you, Max, when I was saying that I need to go back and sort of work on my timeline. Because there's many people that are responsible for my getting to know a bit more about the medium. Okay, so at Bronx Community College, and direct me because sometimes I tend to be scattered, right? But anyway, getting back to everything. Yeah, 1976, 1979, I started taking photos of the South Bronx, and then I met Ricky Flores maybe in the 80s, Ricky? And yeah, we became good friends, and we would hang out, and he'd take a lot of pictures, and I'd see him, and he was always at it, and I was taking pictures too at the same time, and yeah, so long story short, with the Seis del Sur, when they start maybe 12 years ago, Ricky was always asking me to be part. He says, you know, I think that you can be part of the group, but you got to get your together, pardon the French, right? And he says, you have to scan those negs. I've never been always an admirer of the digital photography. You know, I prefer the analog because we have not lived 100 years of digital. So we don't know what's going to happen 100 years from now, right? So, I mean, yeah, I had to scan my negatives. I live in Puerto Rico. I took my negatives from glassines and transferred them to archival plastics. Big mistake, okay, because Puerto Rico is humid, it's hot. I don't live in a position where I can have air conditioning all the time. Okay, so a lot of those negs got ruined, but they're still salvageable. So I'm working on those. Especially with digital. But I mean, will digital be here 100 years from now? We don't know.
Maybe the ancient Phoenicians and other tribes had digital, and
but
that's why we don't.
But getting to your question, how I heard about the Seis, well, it was Ricky and Edwin and Angel. And Angel always knew where I was, by the way. They used that excuse, but they knew that I was in Puerto Rico. And it's just coming back, you know, hello, I'm here, right? So, pero nada, you know, I'm very happy to the Bronx Historical Society that they have reached out to me and made this possible today, and Edwin for doing everything, and Abby for being part of this group, and Angel and David. Ricky, yo te amo. And Joe, thank you for that great news today. But I mean, yeah, the Seis del Sur was overdue.
Gracias. Abigail, do you want to take us through a little bit?
I'm trying to remember the first time that I heard about the Seis. I think it might have been the exhibition at NYU when I had first heard about you guys.
2015.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was at Ben Fernandez's exhibition or at a Seis exhibition, but I know it was the BDC where I met Ricky. And we connected because Mel Rosenthal was such an influence in my path as a photographer of community. And so, you know, I didn't recognize it when I first met you and when I met the rest of the Seis, but just how much I needed to see other Puerto Rican photographers. I started when I was 17 at the High School of Art and Design. I kind of like my way through that. But I felt very obligated to continue photography, and I knew at 18 that I wanted to give back to the community and run a photography program that was accessible to young people and photographing the neighborhoods. And so to now be part of the Seis and to have Puerto Rican, you know, godfathers and a godmother in photography is a real full circle moment for me, because I was so lost as a kid in photography, and today as an adult I get to lead other young photographers to this group and other young photographers to see themselves and aspire to take over photography.
She's an amazing photographer.
Gracias. Thank you. And there are stages that led to this formation of this great meeting of the minds and the eyes and the lenses, and Unfoco, I think, is a part of that story. And Angel, you're a young man growing up in Jackson Avenue in the Bronx, and tell us what you were seeing, the sights, the olfactory sense, the sensorium of growing up in the South Bronx, and then take us a little bit through that to what led you to pick up a camera.
Well, I'm the grandfather of the group. I'm turning 74 in January, so. And that's not bad, My old man was dead at 37. He was a junkie and alcoholic, so I did okay. But I come from a kind of a different background than the guys here and the ladies. I say guys to everybody, so please. I am actually classified retarded by the Board of Education. Well, that's what they call it back then, so I have to use the correct, what do they call it nowadays? Yeah. Bruto. That's what my mom would say. Right, but so I was, like David used to like to tease me, cheese bus boy, but my life revolved spending time in the Bronx with women, since there were no men around. So I would be on going to the sweatshops, spending time there, picking up those voices, going back to the apartment to listen to my grandfather play these beautiful Perez Prado stuff, and I was trying to make sense of it. And then we left Jackson Avenue and moved to El Barrio, because the school kept, they sent me to schools in Manhattan. They had the special programs, but they, all there was a bunch of Puerto Ricans in these rooms with those our people, and we sat there and didn't learn how to read nor write, but they taught us how to set tables. They taught us how to fold napkins, everything that would give me a well-rounded career. So, but I always had a camera, I would make deliveries and ended up buying these things. And you guys probably saw Charlie Bronson program, Man with a Camera. Anybody ever remember that? This guy had like an 11 by 14 Deerdorf, and he would always be on a roof. It was like sitting at the courthouse here at 161, and you aim the camera across the street, and there's somebody always being thrown off a roof, and he captured this. Oh my God. So, and then he would get involved and solve the whole thing, and I said, shit, I want to do that. So, but not knowing how to read and write, and, I bought a roll of film and then opened it up, and I said, oh, me jodí, what is all this stuff? But it had pictures. Cloudy Bright, 255.6, and you went on the shade and this. I said, oh, I understand that. And I learned to process film by, hey, how are you supposed to do this? And people say, 10 minutes, 68, okay. And I would just go, okay, must be 10 minutes now. So I learned all those sensory skills that I picked up in being in the classes, because being in the groups, some of the students weren't verbal, but there was always this visual communication going back and forth, right? And then my mother would grab us and teach us to dance. I was the one that she picked the most, right? So we danced, and the whole thing became a situation of all the rhythms that I would pick up here, right, in El Barrio, and then we moved to the Upper West Side, and I got into Brandeis High School finally, and I had a wonderful art teacher, Miss Rosenberg, Gloria Rosenberg, who's still alive and sends me notes, who said, sit down, sign it. I know you can't read it, signed it, you're going to college. And I said, yes, Miss Rosenberg, and I signed it. And then she said, when you see the envelope that looks like this, come back to me, and I'll read it to you. And I said, okay, and that's what we did. And then she said, you have an appointment, go downtown, don't call anybody, okay? They're gonna ask you questions, it's not an interrogation. And I said, okay. And I said, fine. Now, you know, a few weeks later, a few months later, I won a 4-year scholarship to the School of Visual Arts. Y no sabía leer. So, but when you tell the truth, people will reach out. And I told all these professors, yeah, you know, one said, I should take short Russian literature. What the hell I knew about Russian literature, right? Dick and Jane didn't live with me either. So how can I read anything? But, you know, I took the class and she worked with my reading, and there's no such thing as short Russian literature. So don't believe it, okay? But it took all the visual stuff that I had in my head and that I learned from my mom and the women in the group and the sensitivities into this literature and brought out a sponge, you know? And then my mentor, may he rest in peace, Benedict J. Fernandez, first Puerto Rican to win, Guggenheim. And I delivered his prints to the Museum of Modern Art when he got his stuff. He adopted me in a way. He used to call me his son. And he was, I thought when I met him at the public theater, Joe Papp gave us a corner at the public theater, so you guys work. So I was photographing all these very famous people, and I didn't know who they were. I couldn't spell their names anyway. But Ben, who was also out of the same classes, out of Harran, did not know how to read and write. He won a Guggenheim. He established the photography program at the New School for Social Research. He established Enfoco, right, which he doesn't get any credit for. You know, also the Eddie Adams Workshop was his idea with him, right? Ben taught the Set Model how to teach, taught all these guys that were frightened. He said, no, this is how you dance this. So he taught me to break that shell and learn to speak what I felt. And through that workshop, right, maybe I'm taking a little too much space, but through that workshop, my other mentors was W. Eugene Smith. I was in his darkroom. I cleaned the loft so he and I could talk and discuss photography. And I still couldn't read. I was a kid, all right? I learned about jazz and drinking. You know, I met Ruth Orkin, you know, who used to come to the workshop. You name it, they all came through this workshop. So I got this education. And all the time he said, you need to be proud of where you came from. And I said, you don't have to worry about that. My mother's making sure of that. That's why I don't call myself a New Yorican. Yo soy puertorriqueño, coño, siempre. All right? So that's my part. But, the journey for me was really, it was weird because, you know, it's like when the drummer talks to you and you talk back to the drummer, but you give that extra beat with your foot and you move it this way. Well, that took me into a whole other reality that I didn't know anything about. And I get a little sensitive about it because, man, Ben Fernandez, really, really, man, shot me out of a cannon and said, esto es tuyo. You know? Trust yourself. You can't read, you can't write, you're broke, so what? You know, or like my mom used to say, you're out there, you mess up, and I have to go to court and look up at a white man that ain't Jesus, you're dead. So we all behaved. Anyway, I'm taking too long.
Like, can I? I had one class with Ben Fernandez at LaGuardia Community College. He was teaching there for a while.
He started that program too.
And which is an excellent program for anyone who's looking.
Magnificent.
Absolutely beautiful. They do miracles with so little. But so many amazing photographers have come out of that. And I would rattle them all off. But the only ones I remember are Destiny Mata and Elias Williams.
Yep.
Ben taught me about presentation, how important that was, because I had crappy photos. I think I was in my first year, my first semester, maybe second. But he emphasized the presentation of how you put your portfolio together. I was doing collaging. I was making multiple copies and just of the same image and putting them together in interesting ways. And so he encouraged me. The other thing that he taught me was about protecting your work and not being afraid to say, wait a minute, you can't take my image and then do whatever you want with it. And so he was definitely an inspiration for me and probably the first Puerto Rican photographer I ever met, but I didn't have the confidence to say, hey, I need a mentor. And so from sharing that story, what I would want people to, to take away from it is that how important it is to ask for help, to have mentors, to be on the lookout for people that can help inspire you or connect you to others so that you can grow both in your skill but in your confidence to share your own story.
Yeah, from the roots to the branches, you're maestros and you're sharing with the next generation of aspiring artists, photographers, journalists, and David, can you tell us a little bit about when you started to see the Bronx as an epic story and something that you needed to help share this story. You needed to help preserve it. Does it start with the family? Does it start with what you're seeing outside? Is it something that's coming from inside of you? How did you get started?
I had stopped being pre-med. You're looking at somebody who dropped organic chemistry while acing it at Yale. So I know, I must have been crazy. But I didn't want to be a doctor. And I was hanging out with my boy Stanley Brown. He was in my dorm. My dorm had a dark room. After dinner, he'd go to the dark room. I tagged along. I saw a picture come up in the soup, and that was it. It was magic. It's sorcery. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I mean, for some of us, that moment is like, there's life before that moment, and there's life after that moment. When I saw that come up in the soup, and I could relate to it, I was a science nerd. I knew chemistry. So I got into it, ironically, through the darkroom first. I learned how to process film and print with my boy Stanley. And like anybody else, I just photograph what's around me. I didn't set out to document, for example, the first generation of Puerto Ricans at Yale. But I have it, because I was part of that. I photographed what's around me. I would photograph my family. I'd photograph my neighborhood. I was influenced greatly. I only took 2 courses at Yale in photography with the same teacher. He had been a protege of Walker Evans, and that was good enough for me. But I basically was heavily influenced by people like then Evans, Winogrand, and Friedlander. Those were my trinity. It wasn't until later, a little later, that I met Juan Fuentes. Juan was the publisher of El Observador in Hartford, and he was a photographer in Hartford who had probably the best archive of Puerto Ricans in Connecticut from the 50s forward. And, I had already been, photographing and taking pictures and processing it. And he was in New Haven, and a friend of mine said, oh, you should see this friend of mine. And so I took my little raggedy-ass portfolio to see him. And he was very kind, because it wasn't good. But what he did say was, why don't you spend some time with me in Hartford? And I used to work at the University of Connecticut in the summers. I always had a couple of weeks in August free. So when that was free, I went to Hartford, and he basically taught me proper technique. And also, much more importantly, well, I didn't realize it at the time, but I learned from him that my work stems from my relationship to my community, not the other way around. I'm not imposing my vision, my wannabe Lee Frank, I wanted to be the Puerto Rican Lee Friedlander. Street photographer extraordinaire. But anything I do in my community stems because I have a relationship to it, not because I go there looking for photographs. That's one big difference. For me, my negative sat for 30 years. From 1979 to 2009, I didn't look at my negs. And 2009 is when I made a deep dive. And I found stuff. And that's when I realized what I had. I don't think any of us here set out to document or archive our communities or our concerns. We just photograph what we photograph. That's what Winogrand said. I make pictures to see what things look like when photographed. It sounds kind of weird, but it's true. You know? And so it was then that I realized, oh my God, I got this body of work. And then much more recently, I've been diving into my family photographs. I have a ton of family photographs. I've almost shown none of them. Both my folks are dead now. Not that there's anything scandalous in there, but there are a couple of hard images in there that I know they would have been upset about. But I'm digging into the family archives now, looking at Nuyorican New York, basically, you know, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, right before things started changing. But back then, to say you were Latin in New York meant to say you were Puerto Rican in New York in those days. And so I just document what's around me. I mean, I work on stories, too. When I was at the Times, I'd work on stories that I would photograph. Or I would just write stories and work with people like this guy. That's different. I mean, that body of work that I did for the Times, that is, yeah, I had purpose. I set out to do something in that. I set out to make sure that the reality of the Bronx, at least as I saw it, was there on the record. So, no venga con bobería. Don't tell me you didn't know, because you do know now. That was much more intentional in my photography. My photography now is definitely intentional, but that's with the advantage of being 67 years old and, you know, knowing what I want to do and much more importantly, knowing what I don't want to do. You know, that's just as important. I don't need to waste my time on stuff. But for me, right now, I'm really looking at the family stuff and my personal work. I don't need to, I've already done the big news thing, you know?
Max.
Ya tu sabe. Yes.
Unlike my Seis del Sur, I didn't really have a lot of mentors. I mean, I did take some courses in like workshops, like with Ruth Orkin, Gordon Parks, but they were not like mentors. These were like workshops I would go to. I did work at the Community Service Society of New York, and I was their roving photographer. Now, what is a roving photographer? Recently, I asked Charles Biasini Rivera, who I saw before he died, and I said, Charles, they called me a roving photographer, and he and I started to crack up. And I said, what the heck is a roving photographer? He says, that's one that roves, one that just goes anywhere. But I said, you know what? That at least gave me, you know, a door to understand that in order to be in the world of the big photographers, I needed to get myself published. And at Bronx Community College, I was able to work with the homeless. I got different assignments. I worked with the RSV program. So it was really interesting the way I was able to work with their annual report. You know, and yeah, I understood that it had to be something, you always need to get yourself published. So if any photographers out there that are young and want to know about this, about journalism. But then on another note, Barbara Cox was the public relations director at Bronx Community Service Society. And one day she gave me a card and a little newspaper article that was for the Empire State College. And she says, I think you would enjoy this. It was a workshop. And it was Ricky, it was Mel Rosenthal, it was Will Fowler, and what was the other? Ken Wittenberg. And Ken Wittenberg. And I got to go to that workshop because Barbara Cox was a mentor. But she was not an artist, but she saw that I was very interested in this medium, and this artistic medium, mind you, not only documentary, but yeah. And I got to meet Ricky, and I got to meet Mel, and Mel was wonderful. They were all wonderful, and they had people like Susan Meiseles. They had different great journalists that were going to those workshops and giving, you know, and giving like maybe one day of the workshop. I miss Susan Meiseles, unfortunately. I was a young mom. I was a single mom then. And a lot of the times I had to not go, you know, to these events. But long story short, you know, in order to be where I'm at today, I had to really pave the way and photograph as much as I could. The South Bronx was burning. I would walk with my daughter every day from school, and I would see these buildings that were all torn down, and I needed to document that. You know, I even took signatures once in the train station because I wanted to make a change for the Bronx. So I think, you know, looking at the whole picture, you know, there's so much in my brain right now that twirls, and I want to say so much.
Well, we're going to dive into some of these images in a little bit.
Yeah, but one day is not enough. One night is not enough.
But as we look at, you know, consider the engagement, and Joe, you know, you've been on the front lines for New York City. Your family has been on the front lines in advocating for the Bronx, and you've been on the vanguard of documenting culture as well as the story of the people of the Bronx. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, take us down this path in terms of what you were seeing and this birthplace of hip hop? You know, it's a half a century, right? And now you took. Okay, let's hear the real deal.
I mean, listen, short, sweet, and simple. My story is I was a chubby little kid. Okay, I wasn't that athletic. My stepfather, Michael Caine, at the time was an amateur family photographer, and gave me my first point-and-shoot Instamatic Kodak 126 camera. I fell in love with photography. It became a passion. It became an icebreaker. I grew up 2 blocks from here at the Michelangelo Projects. I was the only kid in my neighborhood that had a camera. I joined the junior high school photography class. I became the junior high school photographer, high school photographer. I just happened to have gone to school with some of the pioneers of this culture that we all love in one way or fashion, called hip-hop. And next thing you know, I'm traveling, taking pictures of, you know, this thing called hip-hop, breakdancing, you know, graffiti, you name it. And I'm just not knowing that I'm amassing a body of work that would become, you know, so sought after, so to speak. You know, again, because of the social media thing that was going on, this, that, and the other, I get an email from a Mr. David González from the New York Times one day that would like to do a story on me. And I'm like, David González, where do I know that name?
Your aunt.
Never met, but heard the name before. I truck, 3 or 4 binders of negatives and contact sheets down to you at the New York Times, yep. And we start shooting the breeze. He goes, oh yeah, is your aunt, do you know a so-and-so? I go, that's my aunt. He goes, oh my God. Do you know so? Yeah, do you know so-and-so? I said, that's my grandmother. And next thing you know, David does this piece on me called The Man Who Took Hip-Hop's Baby Pictures. And the rest is history. This kid from the South Bronx has been all over the world. I've been to Bulgaria, Amsterdam, Korea, Japan, London, this, that, and the other, all because I documented my neighborhood. Now, mind you, when I graduated from high school in 1980, I wanted to become that successful photographer, work for UPI, work for Playboy, work for every news outlet there was out there or magazine. It never happened. It never happened. But I never stopped taking pictures. I did 2 years of School of Visual Arts, had to drop out because we couldn't afford the tuition anymore. Started working for some fine arts photographers, touched base in all, you know, photography has so many different lanes. Fashion, you know, architect, document, you know, portrait. So I did a little bit of everything. And I just walked around with a camera. Walked around with a camera, and I still do. And I just love documenting my surroundings. And I love to mentor and speak to other photographers. And this is a friendship here, a brotherhood, which now is a sisterhood also, that has grown. And we have each other's back, and we've done so much work together. And then I'm just grateful for. I'm grateful. And that's the Joe Conzo story.
Thank you, Joe. And there's I guess reasons, right? So that these images, as we look at some of these images behind us here from Seis del Sur, I mean, like affect us when we look at them. It's kind of shocking, and we should never be numb to that. What, Ricky, was going on? The disinvestment, the misrepresentations, like what was going on, and how do you think other places can learn from the Bronx experience? How do you think future generations can learn from the Bronx experience? How did you kind of look at it as it was happening through that lens?
I think we've been talking around it, but I think history happened to us. We talk about it from the perspective of, this was normal. Growing up in the South Bronx in the 70s and 80s, as we watched these buildings and these blocks disappear, that was normal for us. I think when Joe, one of my favorite lines that Joe has about that period of time, our entertainment was watching fires. Literally fires taking place and stuff. History happening to us was multiple things going on. You had buildings disappearing block after block. You had veterans coming back from the Vietnam War who were addicted, and as such brought those addictions into our community as well. You had series of crime growing, and also you had a real sense that the city had abandoned us, that the city started removing services. This is a typical story for any one of us, anybody who was born in the South Bronx during that period of time and lived that experience can tell you this stuff verbatim. And here we are, running around with our cameras, and we're photographing this. For me, that looked like, who am I as a Puerto Rican man growing up in the South? I'm not really Puerto Rican because I was born here. I'm not connected to my community. I'm not connected to being an American because I don't feel American. Right. And I'm living in the middle of what's happening in my community, which is being systematically devastated. And so what's going on? And the tool was the camera, and beginning to documenting and basically what started as something that I was photographing families and friends took that step back and okay, what's actually happening within my community? And Mel Rosenthal was instrumental in reframing that perspective and putting it into a political context of what was taking place in the South Bronx. And I was very much informed by his own work. He produced a book called The South Bronx of America, which has influenced Abigail immensely. And that's the work that I began to build off of. But so you have the devastation of the community. You had the rise of drug use, and then the AIDS epidemic begins to hit and begins to take out more people like and family members, friends. And finally, Eddie spent a lot of time documenting this. The crack epidemic took the rest, of the folks that we grew up with. So in context, I think that when we talk about the Seis del Sur work, we focus it in that perspective. What was going on, what was built out of it, the positive stuff that came out of it, the movements that have come out of it. From my perspective, you had folks like Angel Franco to look up for because he was an older generation, and he was out there photographing from the news perspective and documenting what was taking place and talking it from that position, which also heavily influenced me and my choice of career later on, and making those connections between what was happening in the South Bronx and what was happening in New York City in general, with issues around police brutality, racism, and how the story of the South Bronx was not just the South Bronx, but it was happening in East New York, Brownsville, Lower East Side, and making those connections overall. So that's how my work began to shape and grow. But again, you know, for us, I think what's really important is getting that story out, reclaiming that history. Our favorite quote that we like to talk about all the time is from Pablo Guzman. It's nobody else's responsibility to document our history but us. Mm-hmm. And I think that we take that mission very, very, very seriously. And I think that's the point of why we did Seis del Sur. We saw Seis del Sur as a vehicle to begin to bring that story out. You know, besides the fun stuff that we have between ourselves in terms of, you know, trading photographs back and forth, which this guy started, but, you know, but ultimately it was about that story and making those connections and bringing that and pushing that story out. So I think that from hindsight, somewhat 45, 50 years out, now at this point, that's a story that still needs to be told because it's still relevant. How is it possible that, you know, whole communities of people were completely wiped out and we're not talking about that? We could talk about hip hop till we're blue in the face, but we don't talk about the context that created it and why why this particular cultural revolution was so successful and is worldwide. And the context is key. And you can't talk about one without the other. And we're finding that this is a problem that is becoming more and more prevalent. And we've been dealing with it, me and Joe, for a number of different reasons, been dealing with that very specifically of how particularly Puerto Rican history within that context is trying to be erased by people who are trying to misrepresent our role in creating that history. So again, there's relevance to the work that we do, and there's a point to it.
Thank you, Abigail.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ricky.
Just to add to what Ricky is saying, I know in speaking with the Seis, there was a conversation about why is this work relevant? Why are we going back and looking at what happened in the South Bronx? It's because it's still happening today. I very much believe that I've been discovering the history of the Bronx, not just because of Mel's book, not just because of the work by these great photographers, but also, you know, understanding the Bronx through the lens of, well, what remains? What's missing that should be here? What happened here that, you know, is of importance for us? But then how do we talk about how we move forward as a community? Like, I grew up in brand new buildings, 1981, which the year before that had been, the entire street of Simpson had been completely decimated. Actually, in Mel's book, I learned that in 1969, there was a 1 in 20 chance that if you lived on Simpson, Tiffany, and Fox, you had a 1 in 20 chance of dying from natural causes. So it's important to know that history, to keep talking about it, because today, gentrification is a new arson that's upending our communities. And although the Bronx is fighting really hard against these kind of issues and looking for ways to incorporate development with community activism and, you know, community-led projects so that the people who have been here, have been trying to make the best of what we have, can still stay here. You know, without that connection to the history, we can't really move forward. And then we can't tell the story to the babies who are coming after us so that they can continue to telling the story, to keep pushing the narrative, to keep saying, I deserve better.
Thank you, Abigail. And here we are, decades later, 4 decades later in some cases, and Edwin, you know, as we look at these images, we just went through a pandemic. We have an opioid crisis. We have social justice movements because of brutality and injustice. And, you know, a lot of these images are here. What's happening in the 21st century is this story right now.
Yeah, no, and three of the images that I have, the three signature images that I have at the current exhibit at the Museum of Bronx History is just that triangle, right? It's and it hasn't stopped. It's the police brutality, it's the drug use, which it was crack in the 80s. Now it's other forms, more lethal forms, and it hasn't gone away. It's just sort of changed. The approaches have changed. The ways that these things get inflicted on us have changed. The methods, right? Because as we fight them, the ones that are bringing them into our community or inflicting the pain on our community find different ways to talk about it, to disguise it, to sort of justify it. And it hasn't gone away. And so that's why those three images for me were important in this present, because it was that sort of triangle of this ongoing cycle that you could see it in the early 80s and 90s with police brutality and the AIDS epidemic and the drugs. And you know that definitely, you know, that stuff doesn't spring up from the ether, right? This is man-made, a man-made triangle, right? It's not like the Bermuda Triangle, right? Which is said to be, if it really exists, natural phenomena, perhaps. This is man-made, right? And so when you come forward 20, 30 years, you still see it in other forms. And it's not going to stop. It's going to continue. And so when we say we have the negatives, it's about that, because we can say, oh, this is just starting and these are the conditions, or these people are doing it to themselves. No, we can trace this back 20, 40 years, right? And it hasn't changed. But I think the good thing about it is that we're also adapting in the ways that we sort of fight those things. The community is adapting in the way that they do that. And with young people, you see it. Like the current young people are really fighting in ways that are very innovative, right? I think that if they took our tenacity and our sort of pace, right? Because we did things in a pace. We didn't want to get burnt out. But we combined that with the sort of fearlessness that the youth have today. We can really turn the tide on some of this stuff. So there's some work to be done there where we need to sort of come together and do more of that sort of intergenerational work across many spectrums. But the shit is about to hit the fan, because what's about to come down on us, right? If we know how crack got in our community in the 80s, right? We know it's about to come down on us in the next 4 years, because we know that it's people who resist and are resilient are the first ones, and the artists are the first ones that they want to go after, because they're the ones that are still here telling the truth and fighting back. And you know, when you see that a comedian comes up in one of these forums, you know, political forums, and calls and puts down our community, that didn't come out in a vacuum. That happened behind closed doors where people are having conversations. And when you know, from the Puerto Rican diaspora, we call ourselves Nuyorican. Angel is very proud to say, no, I'm just Puerto Rican. And there's a box for all of that. We also know that shit is about to come down on the island, because they've already got things in place that are helping people get there, buy property with no tax, you know, ramifications. And for something like that to hit the ether during a big political platform, you know that that's being discussed behind the scenes, and so there's going to be bigger pushes toward that, because they already see the island as just possibly a playground, in the same way that Cuba was in the 50s and 60s. And so, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, but us as artists, you know, you can't fight the world, but you can, in your own pockets of concentric comfort, tackle the issues as you can. And I think that's what Seis del Sur has done since we formed, which is sort of bring things to light, hold up the mirror, show the fact that we do have receipts, right? We have tangible images that were both analog and digital that show that this is the fact on the ground. And you can change the narrative and you can try to spin it, but we can take you back to center and correct you on that. And if we get more people, hopefully out of Seis del Sur and all these other organizations like The Point, Bronx Documentary Center, as more people grow up like really documenting stuff, but also being as open and sort of centered as this youth is, that they're not buying the American dream myth is cracked. And we've seen that in the last year and 2 years where we definitely know that this is all smoke and mirrors, and it's starting to crack. And I think this next generation, or the generation also after that, we're going to see big changes. And it's going to get ugly before it gets better, because power doesn't want to give up power. Wealth doesn't want to give up power. And so that's where artists like ourselves and others have to really double our efforts and step forward, because it's going to get ugly out there, folks. It's going to get ugly.
I have one more question. Thank you, Edwin. And then we're going to open it up to the audience. La historia es la maestra de la vida. And history is the teacher of life. And as we look at the empirical evidence that Seis del Sur has shared and is disseminating, and across these exhibitions from the Bronx Documentary Center back when 2011 was that? And 2013 to this most recent exhibition, Historias, which you can see at the Museum of Bronx History. What is it that future generations should know? Whether it's digital archives, or it's on stone, metal, or tablet, or what is it that we need people to know about the Bronx, about our people, about Seis del Sur, and what we need to know about each other and humanity? What do we need, each one of you, if you could just share kind of like what you want people to know about the Bronx and our people?
The Bronx is a dope place to grow up in. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Okay? I represent the Bronx every day, all day. I'm 61 years old. I've been retired from the fire department now 6 years, after 28 years of working for the city. And this is, like Ricky said, the onus is on us to tell our story. We've made references to other photographers that we won't mention here, like Bruce Davison and a few other photographers that come up to the Bronx, take pictures, and they leave, and they put out these books, and we look horrible in them. It's a one-sided thing. Mm-hmm. Yet every photographer that's sitting at this table shows joy in devastation, shows happiness in all this urban decay that was going on. Why? Because this is our neighborhood, our beloved Bronx. And that's it.
Yeah, I just want to, I think for them, the stuff that I teach my students is, this history is happening to us. It's important. And that if you look at it from right now, it feels like a snail pace, but it's actually moving really quickly, real quick. And it's clear it's happening to this community right now. We've seen so many different changes take place since the late 80s, with new buildings, new structures going up everywhere, population growth, migrants moving into the city, yet somehow many of the same problems still exist. Strangely enough, it's still happening. And maybe the next wave of gentrification is pointed toward what's going to happen next, or telegraphs what's going to happen next to the Bronx. Learn your history, teach it, pass it on. It's really important that people understand that what happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s is mainline directly connected to what's going on right now. The same political people who were around in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are now at Pennsylvania Avenue and hanging out and making policies. And we knew, as New Yorkers, we know who they are, if you're really honest about that. But we're seeing it happen again. And these people do not care about who we are, do not care about our community. So what do we do, and what do we do in response to that? Document what's happening. Mm-hmm. If you're in the Bronx, be particularly politically active, not just on a national level. That's nothing. Get involved locally. You know, pay attention to your local politicians and what they're doing. Do they reflect your values? Those are people you can take direct action to. You know, they're not, you know, distant. They're not far away. They're right around the corner. They got their offices just down the block. Get involved. Talk to them. Find out what's going on. Do their values share yours? Maybe somebody, you need to find somebody else who does. Or if you're smart enough or you're capable enough and you're brave enough, maybe you need to step up and take those roles as well. Because we don't need to have just followers. We need people who are willing to step up and lead and make those changes. And no other ways will that happen if you're not a student of history and understanding and making those connections.
My mom used to say, you control the matter between your ears. That's your real estate. That's your history. You develop your visual vocabulary through that. You develop that. Once you control the vocabulary, the narrative is very easy, you know? And when I started out in this business, I would go into places and, well, it's not Hispanic month, it's not this month, it used to be Spanish month, right? And one day I looked at these editors, I said, you know what, man? I come here, I speak your language because you embarrassed my mother because her English was horrific. I eat hamburgers, and you're telling me that I have to wait for 1 month a year for you to give me an assignment? I didn't come here because of that. And you know, but they talk about stand your ground. You stand your ground. Orgulloso siempre. You have 5 cents, or you know, your pockets are inside out. But you know, I'm present. Estoy presente. You know.
Joe, iba a decir.
And do not ever take a step back. You know, Lolita. You know that beautiful photograph of Lolita? She's standing there. I never seen a more beautiful person in my life. She's, all the time I look at that image, I say, well, like my mom used to say, you know, la falda y everything else up in the right spot. That to me is an amazing image, and that's how I get up every day. You know, I don't get up on what anybody else wants or is trying to convince me to be. I'm going to make the images the way I feel them, I understand them, you know, and be respectful. And David and I, we were doing these stories a lot of the time, was like, our people didn't believe us, you know, and all of a sudden.
Show ID a few times.
Yeah, and yeah, you too. No, but you know, we work there, you know, we really do. And then what happened in the community? You just like the white boys, man. You know, you come here, you're gonna do. And then we had to fight our community, and then the people in charge back at the home, at the base, you know. And so you really got to know how to do this dance, because or else you would just go, oof. But we always had this thing where we would look at each other and go, "Hay tostones," you know.
that refers to a specific day at a specific restaurant on Beck and Intervale.
Yep.
I can't get into the story, but it's a fun one.
But the guy in charge of security, right, had some issues, a challenge. And he would always come up to David and I and go, "Hay tostones, hay tostones." And
we had tostones that
so
day.
we were good. So, you know, if they didn't have tostones, they had mango. It kept you going. So what I'm trying to tell you is I heard it all, you know. And every day I got up, and yeah, some days I go, man, I better go get that delivery job. Or my ex-wife kept encouraging me to become a sanitation worker, you know. But I said, I don't know, man, I want to do this. And I did. And I'm still doing it. Now I'm learning I'm back in art school learning to paint and draw, because I've been hanging out at the border for years, and I'm going back again next year. But this time I want to incorporate paint and drawings into the imagery. So let's see. They're going to be terrible, but I'm going to do it anyway. But what I'm trying to tell you is, like, you know, reach out. You're not the only one. See, we have a problem in our community that we decide to do something, and then we don't study. We don't know they got a bunch of people like us and more, you know. We had our own magazines and books, and politicians, we have a history. But you get up there and you always look at the world like, yo soy el único, I'm the only one. No, you're not, you know. If you turn around, you do a 360, study your corners, and pick up those vibes, you will find out that there are people. My mentor, Ben Fernandez, says, I'm teaching you all this shit for nothing, all right? And if somebody taps you on the shoulder, right, and says, hey, bro, I want to learn this, and you don't put your arm behind and pull them up, I'm going to charge you. And I still have that philosophy. And you know, my people don't show up. I get zillions of white kids, right, who can afford to go to all these nice schools. They reach out, they find me, they're like, hey, can you, today, you know, can you give me some advice and all this other stuff? You know, I want to make my pictures better and all this, and I pick up the phone, I call them back. I spend a couple of hours. They'll ask, how much I owe you? You don't owe me anything. Because Ben's looking up, going, no te atrevas, you know. You know, so we're up here. So what are we going to do next? We're old, they're young, you know.
But there still needs to be changes, though.
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely.
But there are people in this audience that run departments. They can have an extra room where we can come in once or twice a month and say, okay, let's look at this. Let's put it together. Let's develop our own visual vocabulary. It's very simple. All you have to do is show up, like Eddie did. You know, we showed up. Did we know what we were doing? No. But we enjoyed the dance. So it's a process. And please, please reach out. You know, you got a lot of history here and there. And one of the things that David and I always did when we worked on a story, yeah, we represented this big gray lady, but we were learning from you. Because if we were all that smart and all this other stuff, but David is smart, we're here to learn from you, you know? Teach us who you are. Let us dance with you. Trust me. You'd be surprised the work that you come back with. Sometimes we would go, you know, it was too beautiful. So it was so beautiful, somehow we managed to get separated because we can't have that reality here all the time, you know? But anyway.
Thank you.
I was going to say, as someone that lives in Puerto Rico and comes back to the South Bronx, right? When I walk by 3rd Avenue or when I go back to these spaces where I've photographed in the 80s, 70s, 80s, I see a change. But I also see a lot of demise also. You know, there's a lot of garbage in the streets. And that really depresses me. But the other day I was looking around 3rd Avenue and I noticed there's not one garbage can in the areas. So how do you figure that people are going to throw away garbage if we have no garbage cans in the streets? Yeah, it's incredible. So, you know, people that can make change, you know, photographs furnish the evidence, as Susan Sontag said on photography. I'll never forget that. We have the receipts, of course, you know, and we, as photographers, I know that every day I take a picture. There's not a day that I can say that I get up and I do not take a photograph, whether it be with my phone or with my camera. So we have the evidence and we have the receipts, and it's up to us and up to you, public, to really make the difference, to really stand together and look at all these things that can change our communities. And it's not gentrification, by all means. It's not moving out. It's staying in. Yeah.
Gracias. Thank you, Carmen.
I'm going to co-opt a quote from both Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, who maybe like a year apart were both standing on Charlotte Street. And they both said that they were impressed by the tenacity of the people to preserve what they have. And for me, what I hope people take away from our work is that they continue being, having tenacity to preserve everything that we have and getting every inch that we can of power and community and, dignity that we deserve. I'm very blessed in the audience. There are some of my students from the partnership with ICP and The Point, and they know how available we are as mentors just to even have a conversation when they're having a bad day and, are stuck in their work. And one of the greatest honors and really what gives me purpose, and I say it all the time to the kids, which is probably not what the parents want to hear, but I say, you kids have kept me from jumping off a bridge. They give me purpose, they give me hope, and being able to instill in them that the Bronx is beautiful because they are a part of it has been the absolute honor of my life.
Thank you, Abigail. Edwin, David, do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Well, I think I said it. I wrapped it up kind of in that previous bit, but it goes without saying. I think one of the things we always say is like we're not going anywhere, right? And I think that holds true. No matter who moves in, no matter how cramped they make the South Bronx, whose borders continues to change, right? When it's good, the border shrinks. When things are bad, it goes past Fordham, right? And so it doesn't matter what the boundaries are, we remain, right? And so speaking to what everyone has said, the word that keeps coming up is tenacity. We know that because we've lived it. There's a flip side to tenacity, though, where you can burn out, right? Because you just keep taking it on the chin and you keep turning the cheek and taking another blow. And I think we're getting to the point where, like, bullshit, right? There's a point to say, okay, I got to be the good citizen, I got to be the model citizen, and then there's the point where you say, it's time to roll up our sleeves and we got to kick some too, right? Because if you look at it, it is a war. It's a tactical war in a sense that they're trying to take away what's yours and what's ours. We're not going into other people's communities trying to do that, right? And so when I mentioned the young people before, what I love about them is that they're now going into people's offices and embarrassing them, right? They're doing that kind of work, and I think that's the way to go because we're used to that they bomb us from afar, and I don't mean literally with bombs, but I mean, with the philosophy of taking what's ours in different ways and enacting policy that helps them do that. But it is a war, right? Because our families have suffered from that. Our families have passed away because of that. And it's time that we fight back in ways that make them realize that we're not just going to be sitting ducks anymore. And so I'm not a violent person, right, anymore. In my teens, I was quite the character.
We can't run anymore. So.
Right.
I don't know, I still got hands.
You got me. I know.
But we can become
But we can be strategic. We can play the game, right? And with young people, we can teach them the tenacity, the endurance to go the distance, but let them use the spirit that they embody nowadays to sort of continue to go down that 100-yard dash. And I think we're going to be good. I think if we do all of that and we don't let ourselves fed the Kool-Aid anymore, because we've tasted the Kool-Aid and it don't taste good for us, at least the mix they give us. And so we have to roll it up and sort of either nip it in the bud or have them taste some of it as well. That's me these days.
Thank you, Edwin. You want to add something?
And what next? I mean, the future, right? We need to maybe think about archival projects where our work will be secured and safe so that all our youth can see it and use it as a reference. So, I mean, well, we have to face the facts. We can't run anymore like we used to, right, Angel?
Well, sometimes it's a sprint, sometimes it's a marathon, sometimes it's an odyssey, and too often, if it bleeds, it leads. And David, you can have a community that is a part of positive transformation, and the advocacy groups and the spiritual community, forming a fabric that gives people confidence and something to see as a support. What is it like to transform, through a personal vision, an outlet, a newsroom, or how can what words would you have to share about, preserving the Seis del Sur axioms of integrity and vocation, respect for community, honor our history, when you're thriving in our city, when you have a career, when you're, how do you help people recognize this, the importance of having empathy, the importance to embrace the truth and not sensationalize a people?
We have to show up. We have to show up. We have to be present again in the community as a source of knowledge, not just as a, sangano, let's have a beer, but more as, let's mentor this. Let's work on these projects. Look, the project I'm thinking about is what happened in these communities, man, and here in Upper Manhattan that went red. Okay? Well, let's do the people in the street imageries with interviews. Talk to me, bro. Talk to me, sister. Let me know what caused this that you look at me as your enemy and call me an illegal immigrant. Where's that come from? How did you fall into that? Not to say that they're wrong. You have the right to vote for whoever you want and think however you want. But I think it's up to us to go out and report this, gather this information, make imagery, give the voices to the people, And I think that because of all as Eddie was talking about, we're going to be the first programs cut, the arts. It's up to us, besides us wanting to make our own imagery, we need to be, as the old word, presente, within the community. Let's develop this. Let's, like I suggested before, let's get a room somewhere. Someone, lend us a room. We'll clean it, so that we could inspire folks before we expire.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I think also, in addition to showing up and being present, is also not just making the work in the community, but showing the work in the community and having platforms where people are having conversation around these very important issues. Because I think too often our community is so, I feel like they're distant from the work that's produced here of them in the past with other people who would parachute in. And we, as members of this community, really have both the connections, the resources, the passion to bring it straight to the people so that they can see themselves, and also to see the importance of visual literacy and bringing, these kind of photography programs into more schools. They're being cut all the time. Thank God for organizations like The Point and the BDC who are bringing up young people, as has been mentioned before. But we need more of those types of programs where, both parents and kids are seeing the importance and that there is a career path for them that they can follow. I feel like that's still a stigma. Like, no, you need to study. Study your math so you can be an accountant or be a doctor or be a lawyer. I had a conversation with a young woman recently whose father wasn't really excited about her wanting to be a photojournalist, and I think that's also part of it. It's not just getting the young people rattled around, like, oh my God, there's this amazing thing that you can do, and this amplification device for your voice, but also getting the other community members, the grandmothers, the uncles, the aunts, and the mothers and fathers to also say that this is important.
Thank you, Abigail. David, did you want to say anything? Or okay, so let's open it up to the community, the voices of the community. BronxNet's participatory media. We have studios here in the South Bronx, the BronxNet Media and Technology Studios at La Centrale, BronxNet at Lehman College, and these dialogues, can happen through photography. They can happen through multimedia, and we have experiential learning for students and workshops for the public and channels that are yours. So these channels are open for you right now because we're Bronx Stronger together. If you have a question, please come up to that microphone on that mic stand right there. You can line up and let's have this dialogue. Let's continue this dialogue here. Who's going to be the first person to ask a question? Thank you.
Very good.
Hi. I went to the show in 2013 that you guys had at BDC, and I was completely blown away. And ever since then, I was like, I love the concept that you guys came together as a collective to share this work with the community. It was really profound. My question is, for each of you photographers, do you have a particular photo that made, for whatever reason, an impact on you, or that was like unforgettable in your life, or that just kind of haunted you? That's my question.
That's like asking, what's your favorite photograph? It changes. It changes. As maybe I can speak for everybody sitting up here, maybe I can't. But every time I look at my archives, I find something else that really, wow. And, so it changes. Yes, this is probably, some of the cream of the crop that Edwin put together for us up here. But what Abigail said about Carter and Reagan, I have a shot up here of a big Puerto Rican 3-story flag hanging from an abandoned building, specifically when those people came to visit. And we demonstrated and we stood up and, we're here. But, again, it changes. Every day it changes. Every day it changes. But great question.
That photograph that he took, if you look at those historical photographs, you won't see that flag anywhere in them.
That's right.
Get that, you got to understand that context. And I think that he pretty much said a lot of stuff that I feel about my own work. And for me, it's a visual diary. All you're seeing in my work is what I saw that second of that day when I snapped that shutter. Yep. And it all has different meanings and changes over time. And there's some instances where you go back and you look at the work and you find something that when you first photographed it didn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And you look at it now and you go, oh my God, I only took one frame of this. What was I thinking? Lens of time changes everything, and perspective changes everything. For people like David and Anhen and me within the newspaper business, that informs that constant pressure of looking at work over and over again, not only of our own, but of other people, and reevaluating everything that we do. That played a big role in terms of how I edited my book and looking at stuff in a way that I wouldn't have looked at it if I didn't have this profession or, this history between when I first started and when I decided to say, it's time for me to get this thing out. So it changes.
When you listen to these, I do have a photograph, and it has nothing to do with the South Bronx or the Bronx. It has to do with the first time I saw my son. Okay, so that is the most important photograph that still lives here, because my ex-wife threw the negatives out. So, but she wanted me to be a sanitation worker. But going through your contact sheets, and you listen to these Bible people on TV sometimes, you watch the news, and they can quote verses. Well, when I go through my contact sheets, I feel like I'm reading this Bible, you know, and it's a Bible of my history, you know, and all of a sudden there's a new sound is that what they call it? There it is. Hallelujah. Oh, shit, you were really dumb. What, visually illiterate, what happened? Why didn't you pick this? And you know what? Ben Fernandez and Smith told me the same thing. You're going to go through them. Don't throw anything out. I don't know if you guys know who Philippe Holzman was, but he was a very famous, incredible photographer. He made these incredible portraits of artists and everybody else. Yeah. But, you know, we were at a lecture at the New School, and he got up to lecture, and someone asked him a question about a certain photographer, and, you know, should that photographer really throw their images away? And he says, most likely, but he's probably married to a woman like my wife, who whenever I want to cut something up and throw it away, she goes, no, you know, don't you dare. Because down the road, you're going to go, oh my God, that picture's just so incredible. That image brings something up. We mature just like a mango, you know? And sometimes the vision gets sweeter, you know?
I mean, for me, for better or worse, people know me for the picture of the couple dancing in Mott Haven. I took that picture on August 10th, 1979. I did not actually realize it even existed until 30 years later in 2009. And when I saw it. I knew it. I mean, you look at a picture and you know it. That one worked. And once it got published, the reaction from readers was like, yeah, it worked. That said, I agree with like what Ricky said. I'm going to take pictures either way. I'm going to take pictures every day, hopefully. And over a period of time, you'll see my story. What I've done, whether it was my work in the South Bronx, my work in Central America, or in the Caribbean. But it's all part of a long-term process. And the thing is this also, the older you get, the sharper your eye gets if you keep it exercised. And I am finding stuff in my archives as recently as 6 months ago that I had no idea of. And I was like, damn, these are nice. And so I think for me, the excitement is going back with the advantage of having a sharper eye and a hell of a lot more life experience and looking at photographs very differently. And even also looking at the quote-unquote mistakes, the photographs that break the rules. And you find out that, well, actually, that kind of works when it breaks the rules. Don't be too beholden to the rules, in other words. But for me, it's a dynamic process. I'm not going to say that's the best picture I'll ever take. When I talk about the dance, it's like the best picture I've taken until now. But actually, there are a couple more that I like even better.
You know, what's your name? Sonia. Something popped into my head, and I do have another set of images that are really very important. And it was when they announced that we were going to war, at first Gulf War. I said, well, where are we in this situation? And what I meant, we, is the communities that I come from. So I went to an armory, and I convinced them that I should be the photographer that would tag along with them. It was the Harlem Hellfighters. And so I went through the training, gas mask training, all this other stuff, and off we went to war. And one of the photographs I did that still lives here was, here are all these Rican brothers, African-American brothers and sisters standing in this desert as a unit. And for me, it was like, man, I never seen brown and black people standing proud in uniform in a situation where who knows if any of us going to make it back home. So I documented this whole thing, and the Times ran it big, and then they sat me with an editor and wrote what I said, and so I had a story, I had a set of images, but then the war ended, And they said, hey, go down and photograph this parade downtown, the, what do they call it, the Canyon of Heroes. So I went down there and I found the unit. And so I started photographing, and I'm standing to the side, and they started to march, and a bunch of them grabbed me and said, you were there with us, get in here. And I'm in the middle of this group, and of course, man, I'm so tall, right? So everybody's very tall, and they have boots and whatnot. But here I'm going up this canyon, and all of a sudden, people start throwing papers, newspapers, sinks, you name it. And there I have this image, man, of people of color, right, marching, whether I agree with the war or not, okay? But it was documenting our presence, you know, our history. So that is something that I did a lot of. Estamos presentes, sí. And Sonia, good question, thank you. Because now it's, you know, coming back, because all I do is sit in my studio trying to figure out things. But yeah, so it was important to have this. I never called my time at the New York Times it's a job. I would tell people it's my MacArthur grant, because they hired me for my vision. They hired me for how I dance the streets. They hired me because I studied light. I studied rhythm. I studied the philosophy of what's around me and the smells, you know. And it goes on, and I'm still doing the same thing. And I'm not getting paid. Well, yes, I am. We get good union. But you know, we're still dancing. We're still creating. We're still going. Where are we in this little pinhole? You know, because I'm not going to say pinhead, pinhole, because it's, you know. But, you know, when they say you can't, you know, you listen to the drums. The drums will tell you, yes, you can. You go this way, no, but I can't, you know.
I mean, if you're going to survive in the business that we were in, if you're going to survive, like, at the level that we were playing at, you got to know who the hell you are. You got to be really clear about that, because in these places, they can twist your head, and they can turn your attention to stuff that doesn't matter ultimately. And luckily, I know who I am. And, you know, I almost made it 34 years. And then I decided, you know what, I can do something else. And gladly and happily. I've done everything I wanted to do there. But what I do say is, for those of you who are in these selective, quote-unquote, elite institutions, and we could argue about elite till the cows come home, because elite doesn't really mean elite. It just means the people they like, with the same schools. But to survive, you have to know who you are. There has to come a point where you have to know what you want to do. And ultimately, for me, what kept me sane was knowing who I was writing for. You know, I used to tell people, I don't write for the New York Times. I write in the New York Times. I photograph in the New York Times, but I write for my community. I'm not going to make any apologies for that, because that's what made my work strong. And, you know, if you're writing about stuff and you got people in here who come to these places and have no idea what came before, that's difficult. And especially now, when you have also just demographic shift. You know, the city's becoming, you know, pan-Latino. It used to be, you know, when you said you were, you know, Latin in New York, you were Rican. That's all changed, and that has implications too. You know, we talked before about, like, you know, the, you know, what hope we have for the future. I don't know. I mean, I lived through the, you know, the rebuilding of the South Bronx. I knew a lot of the key people there. But one of the major institutions that helped rebuild the South Bronx was a very liberal Catholic church. And for a lot of reasons, those churches don't exist, and the people becoming clergy are extremely conservative. And if you never look at the hierarchy of this city with the cardinal, he apparently has no problems having dinner with Trump. But he would attack, you know, Harris, or have his subordinates attack Harris because she didn't want to go there. The hierarchy has made clear where they stand. And it's not with the future of the church, because this is something I know a little bit about. The future of the Catholic Church is in the Southern Hemisphere, man. It ain't up here. But the hierarchy is still firmly wedded to a 20th century model. And so you don't have the organizing bases that you had back in the day, when you had all these really effective parish-based groups. You know, and the people you're like, Angel Garcia's in there somewhere. I can't see you because of the lights, but he knows it really well through Father Neil Connolly at St. Athanasius. Those kinds of priests don't exist anymore. The parishes aren't anywhere near as strong. And so one of those forces that helped our community, our communities, maintain dignity and fight power, if you will, they're gone. And then the politicians that we have, I'll just talk about the Puerto Rican politicians we've had in the Bronx. I mean, let's get real. Let's get real. You know, we don't have to name names, but you know who I'm talking about. It's been a joke here. And they're friendly with the developers. They're friendly with the same people. I mean, Edwin knows one particular politician who showed up at a community meeting with the developer. With the developer. Go figure that one out. But there are others. You know, how does the borough president of the Bronx, who didn't have any job outside of politics, get a job for 300 plus grand a year at Montefiore for special projects? Again, these are issues in our communities that are not going to be solved the way they were solved before. Yes, the Bronx showed people power. The Bronx showed what united communities can do. But right now, we're fractured in so many different ways. And on top of that, we got the disinformation running rampant. It's going to be a challenging time. This is, I say, you know, know who you are, know what you want. But, you know, a lot of the allies that we had in the past, we can't count on them this time.
Thank you, David. Did you want to say something? Abigail?
I was going to say, for me, my favorite photo is not one of my own, but actually one by Mel Rosenthal of the St. Athanasius baseball team, because it was the catalyst to learning about his work. My neighbor brought me the book and opened it up to this picture of her son with his friends. And I was like, this is cool, but what is this book? And it had all this history, all these, like, there's quotes from Ricky in this book, you know, and it really told the story of the community. And so that's a very powerful image for me, but a transformative moment for me in my own photography goes back to when I was at LaGuardia Community College and I graduated. I was so defeated and really thought, I will never be good at this. I will never be in galleries. I will, you know, I should just give up. And so I did. For 3 years, I didn't shoot one single frame. And then one day, like, the voice of God came on my shoulder, was like, I gave you a project. It's called My Beloved Bronx. I didn't tell you to put it down. And so, you know, like, it was talking to me, and I said, all right. So I went out to Orchard Beach. I took 7 rolls of film. Long story short, I had it processed at a lab because I had no other way to do it myself. And the lab mismanaged the film. So I'm there, and I'm angry, I'm seething inside, but I'm quiet because I learned to just, you know, keep my peace even when I'm disappointed. But here I am unrolling these negatives, and they're still usable. And I think the difference for me that day was that when I went out to Orchard Beach, I was coming up to people in their most intimate moments with their families, and I was, you know, like before I used to photograph you from across the street, that's what I would say. And here I am in people's faces in their bathing suits and telling them what my hopes and dreams for the Bronx were, what I wanted my work to represent, how I wanted to show how beautiful we are as a community, because there was so much negativity in the media. So here I am looking at these rolls of film that are really important to me. I had never photographed in this way before. And I'm looking at them, and like something came over me. It was like, these are the best photos I've ever taken in my whole life. I can do nothing but photography, and I have done nothing but photography ever since.
Gracias.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm going to keep mine short because also I want to be cognizant on the fact that it's already 8:35, and our host, I think, gave us a hard 8:30. So we'll. As a producer, I always got to look at where we cut the funding. Yeah, right. So very quickly, what I'll say, one of my favorite images was a photo, and it was in the batch there, of these 4 or 5 siblings. They're young. Probably the oldest one looks about 6, and from there down. That was a story we went to do at the Thorpe Family Residence, which is a Tier 2 shelter up near Crotona. And we went to do that for a little newspaper that went on for a little while called the Bronx Times at that point. It was me and a few other people, including Doris Quinones, who at that time was running the Bronx Tourism Board, and she worked under Joseph Cecil Joseph. And anyway, so we had wrapped the day. Barbara Leninger, who was the nun that ran the place, very tough woman, she didn't play around. And she didn't have to, right? This is serious business with Tier 2 shelters taking women and families who have been abused or battered and need a second chance. And they go into these shelters 6 months, they help them get their own permanent residence. So we interviewed her. We couldn't take any pictures inside because of, we don't want to expose these women to where they are, et cetera. We understood that. But anything outside we could. And as I left, Doris kept talking to her for just one more question, and I walked out, and there's these siblings on the stoop. And I'm above them because I'm one step above them. And I took 2 photos, one because they were all set up in a way that was very symmetrical. They were pulling on each side of the banners, so there was sort of a geometry to it that was beautiful. Took one. The second one, the oldest sister just looked right up at me, right up through me, right up through the lens and through my soul, as it were. And again, that was one of those photos that I had been using the first one, because I remembered it in my head. It felt like the right one. And it wasn't until we did our exhibit at Bronx Documentary Center that I got a call from Mike, and he says, Ed, I know you really dig this one, but have you seen this one? I'm going to send it to you. And I felt exactly as I felt when I took the photo, because that young lady is looking right up at me. Very regal, very matter-of-factly. And it stuck with me. So that's one of the images that just on pure emotion and also art and craft. But it was one of those moments that it was after the shoot. It was just kind of like the moment arose, it's there, and I took the photo. What that taught me was, one, work the location. Don't take anything for granted, because this could have been a moment where I didn't even take a photo. I could have just looked at them. They're very beautiful. They're very poised. They were there. They weren't making noise or a racket. They were very centered. But it's one of those images, and so as photographers, because I know there's a handful of you here that are studying under Abigail, that work the shot. Don't let anything go for granted. And basically, like also Angel says, don't throw anything away. I know you're working with digital, and it's easy to say this one I don't know, and you get deleted, but that's the worst, because you're never going to get that back, right? And so what you think may not be a shot today that's worth your pudding, in 20, 15, 30 years, that may be a prize photo that all of a sudden people want because no one else got those shots. And that's happened to me, where I've shot things that no one else was in the neighborhood, no one else was there to photograph it, and I have the sole history of it, right? And that makes something very, very, right.
Don't
exactly.
only take one picture, by the way.
Exactly.
Take many.
So I'm gonna turn it back over to Michael. I personally want to thank everyone who came out and who stood the time and was very respectful. So Mike, close it out.
Let's give a huge, epic round of applause to the Seis del Sur.
Thank you, Mike.
Check out seisdelsur.nyc for more information of upcoming exhibitions and how to connect. They have a digital bodega and an interactive arts exhibition at the Museum of Bronx History. Historias, the stories behind the image. Check out seisdelsur.nyc for more information. And check out BronxNet.org. Su Canal. Thank you, Bronx Historical Society. Thank you, Teatro Pregones. Keep Bronx strong para siempre.